It started, as most neighborhood dramas do, on an ordinary Saturday morning. The sky was clear, the lawns were freshly trimmed, and the sound of leaf blowers filled the air like a suburban symphony. For 3 years, Ethan Price had lived peacefully on the neatly ordered cul-de-sac of Maplewood Estates, a picture-perfect community run by an HOA that prided itself on preserving harmony. Ethan had bought his modest 2-story home with the kind of pride only a first-time homeowner could feel. He'd chosen Maplewood for its quiet streets, safe environment, and friendly neighbors. But what he didn't know was that beneath the manicured lawns and white fences lurked an organization obsessed with control. An HOA that saw itself less as a management board and more as a small government with unlimited authority. It began innocently enough. A few passive-aggressive letters in the mailbox about his trash cans being visible for too long. Then came a citation for fence color inconsistency, because one plank had faded from the sun. Ethan had brushed it all off with a laugh. But the HOA wasn't done with him. That morning, Ethan stepped outside with his coffee and froze mid-sip. His driveway was empty. The spot where his silver sedan had been parked last night now looked eerily vacant. For a few seconds, he wondered if he'd misplaced it. Maybe parked down the street? But deep down, he knew. The HOA had finally struck. A bright orange notice was taped to his mailbox. Vehicle removed for violation of Section 5B, improper parking. The absurdity hit him all at once. Improper parking for a car neatly lined up in his own driveway, not blocking the sidewalk, not obstructing anything. He felt his blood boil as he realized what had happened. He called the towing company listed on the notice, and they confirmed it. His car had been towed at the request of the Maplewood Estates HOA. The reason? Driveway overlap. Apparently, one tire had barely grazed the sidewalk line by a few inches. Something invisible to the naked eye unless someone had gone looking for it. Ethan paid the $350 impound fee to get his car back. It wasn't just the money, it was the humiliation. The HOA's president, a woman named Marlene Cartwright, was notorious in the neighborhood for her rigid enforcement of the rules. She lived across the street, always watching, always taking notes. Her favorite pastime seemed to be patrolling the street with her little clipboard, hunting for violations to justify her authority. When Ethan returned home later that afternoon, Marlene stood on her porch watering her flowers, pretending not to see him. But he could feel her smirk from across the street. It wasn't just a ticket. It was a message. Ethan wasn't one for confrontation. He had a calm nature, the kind of man who avoided drama at all costs. But something inside him snapped that day. He'd spent years paying HOA dues, following their endless list of rules, and being a good neighbor. Yet the moment he made a harmless mistake, they pounced on him like vultures. That night, he sat in his garage staring at his car, the one that had cost him hundreds of dollars in towing and fines. The headlights reflected his expression, a mix of anger and determination. Somewhere between frustration and defiance, an idea began to form. He didn't want to yell. He didn't want to send angry emails or beg for fairness. He wanted something bigger, something that would make a point the HOA could never ignore. And that's when he remembered something, his brother's old truck. Years ago, his brother had been a mechanic and off-road enthusiast. He'd built a custom monster truck. Massive tires, a lifted suspension, and neon underglow lights that could be seen from blocks away. It was loud, ridiculous, and impossible to overlook. It had been sitting in storage for years, unused but still in working condition. The next morning, Ethan made a few calls. A tow service agreed to help transport the beast to Maplewood Estates for a small fee. By the end of the week, the plan was in motion. The truck arrived at dawn, a towering machine of chrome and bright orange paint. It barely fit in his driveway. The sound of its engine roared through the peaceful neighborhood like thunder. Curtains twitched. Doors opened. Marlene peeked out from behind her blinds, horrified. Ethan smiled to himself. The truck's massive tires crushed the grass slightly as it settled perfectly on his front lawn. He stood back and admired it. The neon underglow flickered to life in broad daylight, casting a surreal glow over the neighborhood. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a monument to defiance. By noon, the entire street was talking. Neighbors came out with their phones, snapping pictures and whispering. Some laughed, others gasped. Kids pointed and cheered. Even people who'd never spoken to Ethan before came over to get a closer look. Marlene, of course, was livid. She marched to the HOA office that afternoon, summoning an emergency meeting. Ethan didn't need to attend to know what they'd say. The complaints started pouring in, not from the neighbors but from the HOA board itself. They called it an eyesore, a safety hazard, a disruption to community standards. But there was one problem they couldn't get around. There was no rule in the HOA handbook that explicitly forbade parking a vehicle on your own lawn. Ethan had checked, twice. For the first time, the HOA found itself powerless. They could huff and puff all they wanted, but the rules were clear, and Ethan had played by them. It was poetic justice in its purest form. Over the next few days, Ethan added a few enhancements. A small spotlight to illuminate the truck at night. A motion sensor that made the headlights flash when someone walked by. He even put up a sign in front of it, "Parked with HOA approval." The sign became the talk of the neighborhood. Marlene was furious, but Ethan remained calm. He went about his days as usual, mowing his lawn, washing his truck, waving politely to everyone. But every night, as the neon lights glowed beneath the massive vehicle, he felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that his message had been received loud and clear. Still, he knew this wasn't over. The HOA was too prideful to let it go. They'd find another angle, another way to strike back. And when they did, he'd be ready. Because this wasn't just about a car anymore, it was about standing up to a system that thought it could control everything. And Ethan Price wasn't backing down. For the first week, Ethan's plan worked better than he could have imagined. The monster truck became a local legend. Neighbors slowed down when they passed, taking photos or just marveling at the absurd sight of a 10-foot-tall, neon-lit behemoth sitting on a perfectly trimmed suburban lawn. Kids on bikes made detours just to see it. The HOA, however, was in crisis mode. From their headquarters, a small, beige building tucked at the end of the street, they scrambled to contain what they saw as a full-blown rebellion. Marlene Cartwright, the HOA president, had called an emergency board meeting. Witnesses later said she stormed in with a binder full of printed photos of Ethan's truck, each one highlighted and annotated with angry notes. To her, this wasn't just a parking issue anymore. This was a threat to authority, an act of open defiance that, if left unchecked, could inspire others to follow. If one man could park a giant truck on his lawn, what was next? Boats? RVs? A circus tent? In Marlene's mind, Ethan had to be stopped, not for what he'd done, but for what he represented. Letters started arriving in Ethan's mailbox again. Not the polite, typed notices of the past, but thick envelopes filled with official warnings. Each one cited vague, invented violations, unapproved lawn use, improper vehicle storage, visual obstruction. Ethan read every line carefully, and each time, he found the same problem. Not a single rule applied to his situation. He was, frustratingly for them, still in full compliance. He didn't respond. He didn't argue. He let the silence hang, knowing it frustrated them even more. Every night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the truck's neon lights kicked on automatically, bathing his yard in a soft orange and blue glow. The entire street glimmered like something out of a movie. The HOA retaliated by sending a community inspector, a man in khakis and a polo shirt who carried a clipboard and camera. He circled the truck, taking photos from every angle, pretending to measure things with a tape. Neighbors watched from their porches, whispering and laughing. It became clear that the HOA was desperate, flailing for any justification to act. One morning, Ethan woke up to find a large, laminated sign planted at the edge of his yard. It read, "Notice of violation, unauthorized structure." A structure. They were calling his truck a structure now. It was almost comical. The HOA was rewriting definitions to make their case. Ethan removed the sign quietly and leaned it against his fence. He knew what they were doing, pushing him to react, to lose his temper, to give them something they could use against him. But he stayed calm. Instead, he started documenting everything. Every letter, every notice, every visit. He took photos, recorded timestamps, and even captured Marlene on her daily walks, staring daggers at his property from across the street. Then came the fines. The first was $100, then $250, then $500. Each fine cited a different infraction, all equally baseless. Ethan didn't pay them. The HOA sent warnings about escalating consequences, threatening liens and legal action. Ethan knew what they didn't, that HOA fines can't just become legal debts without due process. He had already spoken to a lawyer who confirmed that as long as the HOA couldn't prove an actual rule violation, their threats were empty. The law was on his side, and he intended to let them hang themselves trying. By the end of the second week, the story had started spreading online. A local resident posted a photo of the neon truck on Reddit, captioned, "When your HOA tows your car, so you park this instead." Within days, it went viral. Thousands of comments flooded in, people cheering Ethan's defiance, sharing their own HOA horror stories, and praising his creativity. The Maplewood Estates HOA was suddenly the internet's new villain. News reporters started showing up. A local TV station did a short segment, calling Ethan the man who took on his HOA and won. So far, neighbors who had always feared the board began openly laughing at it. Someone even printed shirts that said, "Team Monster Truck." Ethan remained humble but determined. He hadn't done any of this for fame. He'd done it because the HOA had crossed a line, and now they were the ones suffering from their own arrogance. But Marlene wasn't about to back down. She was too proud, too invested in maintaining her control. Behind closed doors, she was drafting new rules, emergency amendments to the HOA bylaws, designed specifically to target Ethan's truck. They would redefine vehicle, structure, and lawn use in one sweeping document. She planned to rush the vote through at the next board meeting, bypassing the normal 30-day review. When Ethan received notice of the upcoming meeting, he immediately recognized what was happening. They were changing the rules to retroactively punish him, a clear abuse of power. He could have stayed home. He could have ignored it, but instead he decided to attend. The night of the meeting, the small HOA office was packed. Half the neighborhood showed up, many of them curious to see the showdown. Ethan sat quietly in the back while the board members shuffled papers nervously. Marlene called the meeting to order with a tight smile. Her voice was calm but cold as she presented the new bylaw changes. She read them slowly, emphasizing how they would ensure uniformity and visual harmony in the community. But everyone knew exactly what this was about. When the floor opened for comments, Ethan stood. He didn't shout. He didn't insult anyone. He simply stated that changing the rules after the fact, just to target one homeowner, was unethical and potentially illegal. He mentioned his documentation, the letters, the signs, the photos, and said he would be happy to share them with the media if the harassment continued. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some residents nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. For the first time, Marlene seemed rattled. That night, the board didn't vote. They postponed the decision, citing further review. But Ethan knew it wasn't over. He could feel it. The HOA was wounded, humiliated, and desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. When he returned home that night, the neon glow from his truck reflected against his windows like a silent victory flag. Yet beneath the satisfaction was a quiet tension, a sense that something was about to happen. And he was right. Because by the end of that week, the HOA would cross a line they could never come back from, and Ethan's revenge would go from funny to legendary. The tension in Maplewood Estates had reached its breaking point. What had started as a petty dispute over a parking violation had evolved into a full-blown standoff between one man and an entire homeowners association. For weeks, Ethan's front lawn had been both a battlefield and a symbol, the glowing monster truck standing proudly as a monument to defiance. But behind closed doors, the HOA was plotting their final move. They tried letters, fines, threats, and rule changes. None had worked. Every attempt had only made Ethan stronger, and the community more skeptical of the board's authority. Marlene Cartwright's reputation was in ruins. The viral post about Ethan's revenge had now been picked up by national outlets. Memes, videos, and commentary channels tore the HOA apart, mocking their obsession with control. Marlene's once perfect image, the guardian of community standards, had been reduced to an online caricature of a power-hungry Karen. And she was furious, so one chilly morning, as dawn barely touched the neighborhood, Marlene decided to take matters into her own hands. When Ethan woke up, he immediately knew something was wrong. The faint hum of the monster truck's underglow lights was gone. His curtains were still drawn, but he could feel it, a strange emptiness outside. He stepped out into the yard and froze. The truck was gone, and in its place, deep tire impressions scarred the damp grass, leading toward the street. On his porch, another bright notice fluttered in the breeze. Unauthorized Vehicle Removal Section 7C Enforcement Action. The HOA had towed it. Again. This time, they hadn't called the local towing company. They'd hired a heavy-duty wrecker, the kind used for commercial rigs. The truck had been seized in the dead of night under a fabricated emergency order. Ethan stood silently, fists clenched. It wasn't shock. It was something colder, deeper, the kind of still anger that simmers before it explodes. They had crossed the final line. Within hours, news spread across the neighborhood. People gathered in small groups, whispering in disbelief. Many were furious, not at Ethan, but at the HOA's audacity. They'd violated their own bylaws, acted without due process, and trespassed on private property to make a point. Ethan made no statement. He didn't shout, didn't call the police, didn't even respond to the HOA's smug notice. He simply went inside, sat at his desk, and began typing. Over the next 2 days, Ethan compiled everything. Every letter, photo, recording, and witness statement. He wrote a detailed timeline of the HOA's harassment, complete with dates and images. He attached the video clips from his doorbell camera showing the massive tow truck arriving at 3:17 a.m., HOA board members present in reflective vests, supervising the removal. When he was done, he sent the entire file to 3 places: his attorney, a local news station, and the same Reddit thread that had made his story go viral. The next morning, the internet had erupted again. The headline read, HOA illegally tows residents' monster truck in retaliation, caught on camera. It spread like wildfire. Commenters tore into the HOA, calling them corrupt, pathetic, and power-hungry. Legal experts weighed in, pointing out that what they'd done was a clear violation of property rights. A local news anchor even referred to it as the most expensive ego trip in HOA history. Then came the backlash. Residents of Maplewood Estates began organizing. They demanded an emergency election to remove the current board. A petition circulated, gathering signatures faster than Marlene could print rebuttals. Even longtime supporters turned against her, embarrassed by the national attention and ridicule. Ethan didn't need to lift a finger. The community was doing the work for him. Within a week, the HOA board held an emergency meeting, this time under pressure from the residents and the local press. The atmosphere was electric. Angry homeowners packed the room, demanding answers. Marlene tried to defend her actions, citing community safety and visual harmony, but the crowd wasn't having it. When someone asked who authorized the midnight tow, the silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, all eyes turned to Marlene. She hesitated, then admitted that she had personally approved it in the best interest of the community. That was the moment she lost everything. By unanimous vote, the board suspended Marlene pending investigation. Within days, she resigned. The new interim president, a soft-spoken neighbor named Derek, reached out to Ethan personally. The HOA issued a formal apology, rescinded all fines, and covered the full cost of returning the monster truck, plus an additional $2,000 for damages. When the truck was brought back, the entire neighborhood gathered to watch. It rolled in like a returning hero, its chrome gleaming in the sunlight. Someone had hung a banner across the street that read, "Welcome home, Freedom Machine." Ethan didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His quiet smile said everything. That evening, he parked the truck in the exact same spot on his lawn. But this time, there were no angry notices, no fines, no patrols with clipboards. The HOA, now humbled and restructured, had bigger concerns: rebuilding trust, repairing reputations, and cleaning up the mess left behind by their own arrogance. The neighborhood felt different after that. Lighter, more human. People started talking again, not about violations, but about community. Some even joked that the monster truck had saved Maplewood Estates. Months later, Ethan decided to move on. He sold his house for a profit. The newfound fame of the neighborhood had oddly increased property values, and took the truck with him. Before leaving, he parked it one last time under the glowing streetlights, turned on the neon underglow, and left a simple sign on the lawn. Parked freely. Lesson learned. When he drove away the next morning, the roar of the engine echoed through the cul-de-sac, leaving behind not chaos, but clarity. The HOA had learned the hard way that power without restraint leads only to downfall, and that sometimes the quietest revenge is the one that teaches the loudest lesson. And as for Ethan, he never had another parking problem again.